Mm.
Hey everyone, I'm Jo Holden. I'm an active conduit for source intelligence and I'm here to help the collective. So I've got another session for you. This is going to be part 3 to the Kim Stalker, Kim Poster, Kim Personator series that it's going to become. I want to apologise for the gap between sessions at the moment. I had made a pact with myself that I were going to be recording more regularly. And it's been an interesting few weeks, but specifically this last couple of weeks, more energetically. There's the stuff I've talked about, as in, being in the firing line on the receiving end of some heavy, nasty energies and whatnot. But there's been another side to it, which has been much more positive, but equally distracting in terms of some upgrades, I guess, would be the best description for it, which at this moment in time, the guidance I'm receiving is not to talk too specifically about the ins and outs of, there's been a series of ceremonies, you could say, or there's been 3 specific sort of experiences, and they've been spread out from the first recording that I did, that intro and a caution about Kim Goguen. It's like that set in motion. That was me taking action to kind of speak out and stand up for myself, and that seems to have sort of initiated a chain of events that there's been 2 other. So that specific day had an influx of very high frequency sort of energy and some uh, sort of visual downloads, you could say, that came with that, and some sort of instructions, you could say, that I've kept a record of, but at a later point, I will share more about that more specifically. I keep being told, let things settle in. So um, we'll see what that means. So that was all the way back on the 20th of May. And then since then, in this last couple of weeks, there's been 2 other similar types, but the sort of next steps is been like a 3-part process, you could say. And so that has been great in a way. I've felt a lot of positivity that's come through with that, but it's also been quite intense, in the sense of there's been a lot of cleansing and clearing and purging. I've been doing some detoxing. It's been a whole thing that has had me feeling somewhat I don't want to say away with the fairies, but somewhat um distracted when it comes to wanting to focus and deliver content. So um when I did that last session, which was the overview of like different forms of magic and whatnot, even then I was feeling a little bit out of it, and I'd wanted to continue on and just do the next 2 sessions. That's going to be, that'll make a little 3-part series. But then the next kind of experience happened, and that has had me focused on other things. So in the meantime, because there has still been some negative attempts, let's say, to send attacks my way, I'm still getting disturbed, in the astral whenever I'm asleep. And a lot of the things that I described in the magic and witchcraft the part one where I talked about, how did I know it was happening? I talked about the various types of strange dream type experiences and lucid dreams. So there's been some of that going on. And through that, I've felt encouraged, let's say, to continue to speak about my experiences with Kim Goguen and her, whoever it is that she's working in conjunction with to do the behind the scenes stuff. There's a lot more to the story than what I've shared so far. I've just told people about what's happened really since I sent content across to her last year. I did share some messages where there was a backstory to it. I'd been involved in assemblies and whatnot since 2021. And so today I want to talk about how Kim, in fact, let's just move this along, how there's proof that despite all of the things that Kim claims that, she wants to work with humanity to bring about positive change, and she's on a campaign at the moment that is, ever since I've started recording this material, she has been in most of her broadcasts really plug in this idea that she just wants to work with the people, we the people, if we unify. She's not interested in having anything to do with the deep state anymore, despite having claimed many times that they were all wiped out and whatnot. But seeing as they're all still here, according to her, she's, other than surveilling them, she's done with them, and she just wants to work with us, the people. So I'm going to show you some proof that we, the people, thousands of us, have been trying to do that and have sent Kim solutions to some of the problems that would actually bring positive change for people in the here and now, not future forecasting, not waiting for funding to come through, or just reclaiming our natural rights and reinstating our true sovereignty. How that could and would impact how the financial services work, how the legal lawful system works. There are things we could have been doing all along that Kim's very well aware of, but has at every turn dismissed, ignored, argued against, shut down any attempts for people to actually, one, grasp this information, understand the significance of it, and two, implement it, that could have by now already started to cause significant change in those systems. So given that she does have thousands of people that listen to her, she could have been a key figure in encouraging that and driving that, but she's chosen not to be. So let's look at the proof of that. Okay, so here are some messages that I sent to a friend, the friend who I talked about in the previous session, who was so she was involved in the Global Health and Wellness Consortium. She was the deputy director, but she was also closely connected at that time to Tank, who was Kim's right-hand man at the time. He was deputy director of the GIA and PGSD, which were the People's Government Services Department that had been set up. And me and my friend had been having a catch-up. We had a Zoom call. That was on Sunday the 17th of July. And partway through that, we started talking about some stuff connected to what was happening with the system or wasn't happening with the system more accurately, in terms of there'd been for months a sense in Kim's updates that it was going to be any day now, any day now we would going to get all the way through to the front end of the system and money were going to go in people's bank accounts. That's when they'd announced there was going to be a figure of, I think it was $3,333 or whatever the equivalent in each currency going into anybody and everybody's bank account. But every time they were right there, they were just about to do it, and then there'd be an issue, a problem. And so me and my friend in this conversation, we were talking about the energetics of it, and in relationship to that, what in terms of the physical material reality, the operations, how our energetic states have to translate into action, right? So it's all well and good to give another example. You can sit there and want to, get in shape, for instance, all you like, and you can get yourself all fired up about it. But if you're not actually taking any action towards that, if you're still living the same lifestyle that's got you in the whatever that out of shape state is, as we know, things don't just change just by sitting and thinking about it and willing it into being. It that will has to translate into action, right? So we're talking about that. And I was running through some examples of things that I had identified in my own research that could help. And I didn't know loads about it, but I'd come across content from other people that were talking about how people they were accessing states of what you might call sovereign litigation. So they were challenging certain legislations and certain financial protocols and procedures and proving that there was fraudulence attached to that, that there was a lack of transparency in terms of various types of instruments, and as a result, it ties into equity and trust law and into contract law. And so I didn't have a load of information about it, but I was following certain people online, looking at what they were saying, seeing that people were having success, and I saw it as a mechanism that could help shift energetically those of us that were involved in assemblies and in the global health and wellness and the people involved in, various core teams, whatever care used to be. And there were various departments and thousands of people involved. And I thought if we could introduce these principles, learn them for ourselves, and implement them in relationship to or in connection to all of the stuff that Kim was talking about, she was doing behind the scenes, because kind of got a bit of a disjointed perception at the time, because I was listening to what these people were saying. At the same time, I was thinking to myself, well, in the here and now, that's all well and good, but it's not going to be necessary in the future because Kim's taking control or has taken control of the financial system. And therefore, all of this having to kind of, stand in your power and fight for your rights. And I see the necessity of it now, and I can see the value in it right now in terms of sending signals to whatever system it is that Kim Goguen was working with. Because, as I've put here, I believed at the time that one, that system existed, two, that it had and was taking over the existing financial system. And if it was connected to and powered by source, as Kim claimed, then it must be responding to all of us as well, because we're all representatives of source. So to me, to send signals to that system to say, you know, we really do want change. We don't just want it in a we're going to sit here and wait for it, but we're willing to take action. We're willing to stop paying certain things if we know that they're wrong and we know that they're fraudulent and we know that we're being lied to and we know that we're being taken advantage of. You know, the definition of split energy is to know that something's wrong and just keep doing it anyway, right? So to me, at that time, that was a big problem that we were facing, that people on the one hand wanted the positive change, wanted to be able to get projects off the ground, wanted to be able to take action in a more positive direction in terms of introducing restorative businesses and you know, environmental stuff and all of the different things that different people were passionate about. We were saying we wanted all of that, but then we kept feeding the beast, if you like. You know, we kept paying into the very systems that had been designed to entrap and enslave and siphon from us. So, on the one hand, if you want change, you have to be willing to participate in the creation of it, right? You know, and be the change you want to see and all of that. So that was the discussion we were having. And so far into it, my friend were like, as I were explaining and describing what I'd come across in terms of what other people were already talking about and already using, she was like, let's record this first. And could you put some sort of plan or proposal together so I can share this with the sort of core, you know, the tippy top team who were working at that global level, and this sounds great because what it would have done is redirect a lot of the stuff that at the time Kim was telling us about, you know, the cancellation of all the agreements and charters and contracts and covenants and all of this stuff that rendered various institutions and, you know, pretty much any and every institution in terms of government, in terms of financial bodies and World Health Organization and all this stuff. Well, she was telling us that they were all defunct, they were all continuing on without any agreement or charter because we were still feeding money into them. They were obviously going to be able to just carry on regardless. So what I was proposing is essentially to move the flow of the currency away from them rather than pay to those who were using those very funds to cause harm to us. Let's pull that energy back, that currency back. Let's not feed it into them and let's direct it elsewhere. I.e., we could, first and foremost, people could themselves benefit from that instead of paying for things that they shouldn't have to pay for. They could themselves benefit. But from that, where they could afford to, they could invest some in some of these projects that could then start to bring about more positive change more immediately in their more immediate environments. So it all seemed to me quite straightforward in the sense of the information that Kim was putting out in terms of the position we were in globally, both politically and financially. So all of that is what is in these messages. So we had the conversation on Sunday the 17th. My friend had asked me if I'd put a plan or proposal together. I had already done a very brief overview for one of the assemblies I were involved with, and there'd been, you know, a fair bit of positive sort of reaction from people. But I put it in a more detailed format, and sent that over. So these are the messages where, oh, and we'd also talked about, you know, sort of reconnecting with our organic soul transmissions. So there's the source meditation thing that I sent in addition to that. It was, you know, pretty lengthy discussion, but my friend just wanted something that she could share, that rather than someone having to sit and listen to the whole conversation, they could just see, you know, the outline of it. So I sent all of that over. I did that on Friday, July the 22nd. This is 2021. And so to give a little bit more context of what the narrative at the time was from, you know, the core team and from Kim herself, I've put a couple of clips together. So this is from the 21st of January 2021, so a few months before those messages I've just showed you and the plan that I put together. That was in the July, that were the summertime. This is the start of the year. So I'm going to play you this, which is Kim sharing a new hat that she had been bestowed with at the time. And then on the next slide, I'm going to show you an official notice that was then posted on the app at the time. And, you know, if you didn't access on your mobile, then on your desktop, there was a web page that you could go to that was for Life Force and what they just created, which was the first iteration of UNN. So let me just play this.
This week, you know, we've talked about trustee job this week. Now I have another hat, right? So I'm an ambassador. So I'm an ambassador to a council, not the World Council, not the World Order, not the cabal, not any of these folks. These folks would not talk to those people. So, and they're not here. So they're elsewhere. Hence my background this week. So I'm going to read this to you. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm not telling you to write something up on, you know, YouTube or wherever this is posted about how I'm wrong and all of this stuff. I'm just going to read it out to you. So take it for what it is and let's let it go. So, okay, the 21st of January will be Planetary Liberation Day. The planet will move out of what they refer to as the danger zone for good and never to return. So they still refer to us as Midgard, just so you know, because we were the guardian between both sides, as we talked about last week. Monetary concerns will be over by the 6th or 7th of January, allowing for the full restoration to take place. The network you have set up will be responsible in ensuring no child goes hungry. And this will occur very, very quickly as the 11th in your calendar month. So the solar return taking place on the 3rd of January in your current calendar year brings new hope and a feeling of overwhelming joy. In current time, it is the birthday of your planet. So that's what they say, happy solar return. The age of darkness is over, and we have survived. We shall live in eternity, vast into the light, in the light of the Creator. We couldn't be more pleased with the outcome of this transition. Had it not been for you and the entire enforcement team, this may have gone horribly awry. Therefore, the Council would like to invite you and all of humanity to join us in our celebration of life today, as the omnipotent Creator gifts us all in abundant blessings forever and evermore. The dawning of a new age has begun, the golden age, not just on Earth, but in the infinite multiverse. We too end many millennia of oppression and are beginning the restoration of many planets. So that is a message in from the Council.
Okay, so I should say it's been very difficult to find the original source materials of what Kim and Tank and, you know, the various iterations, Kim's moved from group to group quite a bit, as we know. So to try and find the source material anywhere other than what other people have kept a record of and have shared online, it's not easy to do. Even going back to the old UNN app, I did check to see whether it went back as far as 2021. It doesn't. So I really appreciate the fact that these records have been kept and that Team Bubba have been putting, you know, their materials out for as long as they have, because otherwise there'd be no way to go and sort of cross-check. And I know what I remember from, you know, attending the assembly meetings, and at that time the Life Force calls were every Sunday evening, and I remember, and I took some notes and stuff, but it's not the same as actually being able to re-listen to it, re-watch it, and show other people. It's like, look, this is what we're being said. So as you heard, we were supposedly out of the dark age forever. There's been non-stop recurrences of us being back in the dark age ever since, but you know, that supposedly came from the council, which I'm guessing is, you know, the Universal Protection Unit, is who Kim had been working with, who was the protection unit aspect of this council, you know, the Universal Council. So either their information was wrong, or perhaps Kim's interpretation of their information was wrong, but you heard how imminent, you know, these changes were supposed to be taking place. No child were going to go hungry as from January of 2021. Obviously none of it's happened, but that aside, what I'm wanting to do right now is establish the context for why I would have believed it were worth sending the debt relinquishment plan over, because what was also being told was that, you know, the global repository had taken over control of all the global assets, and all of the debt instruments had been brought in under that as well. And, you know, so let's move to the next slide, and then this is the formal statement to accompany that. So that was Kim reading out, you know, what the quote unquote higher ups had told her. But on the UNN app, or, you know, the Life Force app, whatever version it was at the time, there was an official statement put out. So this is again taken from a Team Bubba video, because there's nowhere else I could get it from. And that's not a slight on them. I know how these things work in terms of should Kim at any point want to address this, of course she's just going to put me in that category of, oh, she's working with Team Bubba sort of thing. And I've appreciation for the work that they've done. I can assure you I'm not working with Team Bubba. We obviously have had need to each respectively look at Kim from a new lens as a result of our personal experiences. That's the only thing that we've got in common. But you know, I know that any opportunity for Kim to twist things as and distort things as nefariously as possible, she will. And because of some of the grievous things that she said about Team Bubba, I know it would be an easy tactic for her to use to try and, you know, sort of lump me in. So just putting it on the record, had I been able to go and find the original resources from anywhere, I would have done that to avoid, you know, that accusation. But anyway, let's look at the
week.
statement.
You know, we've talked about trustee job.
That's this one. Okay.
marks the third anniversary of the sovereignty letter issued to Mr. Trump on January the 27th. Now, much has passed since then, and things did not improve, only got much worse, particularly since last March. How different things would it be if that document was implemented? The deep state and their financial armies rendered mute, Crown agents and the Rothschilds also, plus the added bonus of deleting all income tax on wages for all Americans. But as one major letter was bypassed almost 3 years to the day, another letter proclaiming much from the same trustee, one ponders how much this letter will actually deliver beyond the sensational style rhetoric. Real actionable events are required now. Words have long since passed their sell-by date and useful date. So this came out last week, January the 21st, for immediate release from the Office of the Interim Head of State, announcing the ratification of Kim Goguen as the interim head of state until such time as peace is restored on this planet. During the time of interim government, Global Intelligence Agency, GIA, serves as the intelligence agency to the head of state until each government can form its own structures for protection and security of the land. An eviction notice has been duly served upon all those occupying the offices of the United States government, all in capital letters, meaning it's fake, past, present, and future, real, presumed, self-appointed, or elected to vacate government and government-related offices, both physical and occupational, on or before the 31st of this month. This eviction is enforced by the Global Enforcement Unit under the GIA Directorate. All funds are officially curtailed to all offices of the former government, including but not limited to the Office of the President, Congress, all NGO agencies, including but not limited to the Federal Reserve, IRS, FBI, CIA, FDA, CPS, NASA, NSA, DHS, DOJ, EPA, AMA, and all related staff. The people herewith relieve you, the occupying government and its related officers and staff, of all duties. You no longer serve the people in any capacity. Interim officers have been activated to fulfill all critical needs, and the ratification of Kim Goguen as interim head of state follows the progression of power as outlined by the GIA. Now, this follows the ratification of martial law declared by global military generals on the 21st of March last year. This progression of office is an essential step in the restoration of the planet and returning governance to the people. Funding will now be provided to the newly appointed state assemblies as the new representatives. All agencies will need to apply for clearances and/or positions with the Global Intelligence Agency Office of the Director. Funds are available to ensure a smooth transition and restoration of those areas which have been severely damaged by the false representatives of the people. Funds have also been designated for emergency shelter, food, safe harbour, and to assist all those in need of services. Many will be surprised by these actions. We assure you, though, that through great and exhaustive action, power has been restored to the people, and that you must now do your part and step up. And we call upon all people everywhere to form your representative assemblies, no matter your nation, state, or continent. The people hereby assume full governance of themselves with all the rights contained therein, facilitated and empowered by Kimberly Ann Goguen, the interim head of state.
Okay, so you can see why, based on what I said at the start, I would have thought what I was looking at and had, connected those dots, that these are steps that we could take that would actually start to free us, disentangle us from some of these fraudulent systems. And you can see why I would think that would be in perfect agreement and alignment with what Kim was declaring, which is we no longer want to deal with people who just want to lie to us and steal from us. And according to that official notice, they were all getting evicted. And so when I put this plan together, I felt optimistic. I felt this is going to be the perfect way that we can really start to take action without even needing to wait for the system to fully connect with the front side and all of that. So just put a couple of notes here. So the emoji, not mine, again, came from Team Bubba's post. The reason they were showing the app and all of the merchandise and stuff is they have made the point that despite the fact that Kim on numerous occasions has sold this whole story of how, she's not interested in money and getting money, and she just wants to help the people, and obviously she's a very selfless person. And there's a lot of evidence in terms of some clips from some of those girls' calls that got shared, and some early Life Force calls, or Speak Project it was at the time, some early calls that Kim, where she was talking to people in a smaller group sort of situation, and they were asking like, oh, what can we do? How can we kind of assist and get involved? And there's various clips of Kim sort of like pushing this idea of like, well, we're going to sell t-shirts, you wear t-shirts, rather than, people were asking like, is there going to be official sort of is there going to be a website? Is there going to be official documents? Are we going to essentially get credentials, like a badge or something to say that we are working with the enforcement unit? Or, people were asking those types of questions, and Kim were like, well, we're going to sell some hats and some t-shirts. Yeah, so they've kind of took the mick out of that. But I'll do a different session, and I don't think it's something that we need to perhaps overly labour, but at the same time, it's a valid point, because it's just how disingenuous, it's like the public perception or portrayal of what Kim likes to present to people versus the truer motivations and motives behind things, where that sort of shines through. It paints a very different picture. So in the months following that notice, you can imagine, or if you've been following Kim's content, you will know, each and every update there were serious important meetings that were happening, and people calling the diplomatic line, and all this stuff was happening, but it just never quite made it into reality and into public purview. At the time, for those of us that were heavily involved with assemblies, we weren't taking the more objective, like take a step back. We were in full, oh, you know, we need notices for this, and we're investigating as local authorities, and we were looking into the water board, and we were busy. So we were taking all of what was being said as truth, that we did, you know, we needed to be prepared, and we needed to know how we were going to move forward. So questions that could and should have been asked weren't being asked. We were just kind of all, you know, sort of blinkers on, wanting to prepare ourselves to be the new people's government, I guess. You know, it all seems a little bit silly when I look back over it, but at the time it all felt very real and very true. Okay, so I will show you what that debt relinquishment plan was and what it looked like. I've kind of already given you the overview anyway, but first I just want to show you some of the resources that I was coming across in my research, because it's still important information, and I do still want to encourage people to go and access this stuff, because the points I was making then, they've become all the more relevant. You know, we're 4 years on from that, and there's been no, you know, funding to save us. There's no Galactic Federation fixing things for us. You know, no, it does have to come through and from us. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have, you know, connection to higher guidance and higher selves and whoever, whatever it is that we believe is supporting us. But they're sitting around and waiting for someone else to do it for us, or do the heavy lifting. It can only cause stagnation, right? So this is the Sovereign Project, and I'm showing you their website because compared to the amount of content that they have put together on the website, there are various courses, very low cost, very good value. And when I say low cost, I'm talking, some of them are free. And for instance, that 22-week course, if I remember correctly, I think it was about £60, but the amount of information and the value of information that's in that is incredible. And they also offer a lot of support in terms of there being groups you can join if you want people to discuss things with. You know, there's I think they call them chess clubs, but they have got stuff on Telegram as well. There isn't as much on YouTube as I thought there would be on their website, or rather their channel. But the website has loads of really useful resources, and the Telegram thread is very interactive. And Pete Stone, who is the guy that set up the Sovereign Project, he has done a fair few interviews. So if you look him up, you'll find more content that other people have posted of his. So that's one resource I would highly recommend. And some of what I'm going to show you, I've come across them since, you know, these, I didn't know about all of these resources in 2021. I just knew some. I'd just seen some interviews and listened to some podcasts, and I didn't have, you know, as much awareness then as I do now. But I would rather, with the benefit of hindsight, signpost people to the stuff that I've found the most useful, you know, throughout this few years that I've been trying to learn and get my head around this stuff. So Sovereign Project is one. Okay, Peter Wilson's channel, Checkmate the Matrix, again, a YouTube channel. He's got a lot of content. He's very clued up on private trusts and power of attorney and cancelling debt. And during lockdowns and whatnot, he knew how to kind of get around that with private members associations. And he's got a lot of knowledge, a lot of information. also has a website, also has, you know, I think his model is more if you wanted to sign up, there's maybe more of a subscription type thing that you can do, but a lot of free information, you know, that loads of content on there that's very useful. Sovereign Empowerment, another YouTube channel. Gavin Yanid set that up. He also has a series on there that is Strawman to Lawman. I don't know Damien's surname, but he's great. He really knows his stuff, and really ties in the more spiritual side along with the sort of legal, lawful, and financial aspects of it. And they also, so they interviewed and they also act as affiliates for Frederick Graves. I think I've got his name right. I did buy his course. He's an ex-judge who's written a course so that the layperson can understand what their rights are and how to act when it comes to any sort of situation should you need to appear in court, which a lot of the stuff these people in these channels teach, unless you're the one who's pursuing someone else with a claim against them, a lot of the time you wouldn't even need to go to court because you would be able to address things, you know, with this information. Once you start to get your head around a lot of it, it squashes and cancels any claims that others may threaten to make against you. However, should you be the one wanting to litigate, and or should you find yourself in a situation where you've no choice but to present yourself in court, his course, written, you know, as a judge, is designed to help people understand that a lot of the things that lawyers and barristers and, you know, different professionals are not going to tell you, he does. So, you know, that's a very useful resource as well. Robert O'Deck. So this is an interview that he did on Sovereign Empowerment with Gavin Yanid. What an interesting guy. His channel's actually been taken down now, but there is a lot of other interviews that he's done, other podcasts that he's you know, being invited onto, and he has a website, and he has developed an AI specifically for any and all English speaking countries. It does have, it's multilingual in the sense of if there's anyone who's in an English speaking country that it's not their first language, they can get translations, but the laws themselves that this AI has been, the parameters of the laws that this AI has been programmed to look at to ensure that it doesn't go off into, you know, sort of some of the more there's misinformation online with some of this stuff. So rather than it have the ability to just take information from anywhere and then misinform people, it's been put under very tight restrictions in terms of what materials it can draw from, but they're all legal, lawful, standing, you know, texts and the sort of case books and all of that kind of stuff. So that the way he describes it is it's like having a barrister, a top performing barrister in your pocket sort of thing, because you can not only just ask it questions and get information and it's explained in a more layperson's vocabulary, but is drawing from actual precedents, legal lawful precedents. It's not just that, but it can draft notices for you, and you know, it can take a lot of the stress and fear, concern, worry, you know, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? It can take a lot of that out of it for you. So I have now, I've not had a chance to like really properly use it. I've not needed to, but I have bought his book, and the AI is free for you to access, but it helps if you've got his book so that it offers instruction and direction for how best to use it and whatnot. So that's a really interesting interview that he did. As I've said, he's done many others, but I would highly recommend for people, you know, if it's of interest. I do believe moving forwards, more of us standing in truth, standing in our power, knowing what our rights are, all of that is vital. But I'm not here to tell anybody else what to do. So, you know, I'm just recommending these in terms of what's available, you know, because not everyone's going to know about it. Peacekeepers is another YouTube channel. They've had a lot of success with a lot of different things. More recently, they seem to have really been honing in on, for us in the UK, we have council tax, as everyone knows who's in the UK. And they've really been battling against the unlawfulness of that, and you know, really boiling it down to which legislations that relates to and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that they cover, but you know, they're great and have been doing great work. Richard Verbs, he is more, you know, the interviewer. He interviews a lot of people about a lot of different stuff. It can be anything from utilities to council tax to other types of tax to financial instruments to debt and all of that. But he will do his own little updates where he's put certain things into practice, and he'll let people know, you know, what the outcome of that's been and whether it's been successful and whatnot. So, you know, this is really about, there's been trial and error going on for a long time, and some things work better than others, and some things are being discovered that, you know, wasn't previously known. So it's a progression that's happening. But if we're going to unify, these are ways that we can do that and gain benefits pretty much immediately. If it's stuff that, if it stops certain expenditure having to come out of your pocket, and you know, it's worth looking at. So that's a few more examples. Okay, so from the US, Brandon Joe Williams, he also offers a full free course. He has so much knowledge, so much information. He does focus in on the UCC, the Universal Commercial Code, which is a more American thing. Now that I know about Robert Odek's AI, though, that's going to help, because I've been listening to some of his stuff because he's so interesting and entertaining. At the same time, as he's talking about certain aspects of the UCC, naturally my question's been, but how does that relate? How does that apply in the UK? Because the UK doesn't use the UCC. You know, it would come under Consumer Credit Acts or something along those lines. So I'm like, this is fascinating, and I do know that there are people in the UK who have been using his information to, you know, sort of squash certain debts or pay certain things, but perform on financial instruments in the ways that he's recommending. I know that it does, there is a conversion that happens where it does apply, but I've not had time as yet to like fully get my head around that. But I think I will be using Robert Odek's AI to figure some of that out. So, but again, he's also got Telegram groups, he's got a website. There's so much free information, really worth looking at. And again, you know, he is very optimistic that anybody and everybody can disentangle themselves from any system that they want to if they understand his information. So, yeah, check it out, I would say to that. A Telegram chat that I'm highlighting this because there are many different chats and groups and channels on all different social media sites, as we know. Stacey's World Rocks is the only one that I've seen really emphasizing not just cancelling or challenging certain things, but reclaiming that, you know, her information tends to focus more on the direct debit reclaim process, which again, it's not something I've had the opportunity to really sort of get stuck into, but as you can see here, there's a lot of people, their testimony at least is that they're having a lot of success with it, which I do know on that chat there's a lot of screenshots that get shared where people are showing the refunds actually going back into the bank and stuff. So again, I'm not telling people you should be doing this, but at the same time, if it can help anybody, if anybody's in, you know, dire straits or in a genuine state of panic about any of this stuff, what I would say with Stacey's channel though is, if you are new to all of this information, really do go in there and read through what's available in terms of the pinned messages, and, you know, and if you know how Telegram works, you know, if you go onto the group title, there's all the different, you can access the media and the files, and she tends to be quite abrupt with anyone who goes in asking questions in a, you know, like, explain it all to me kind of way. She's quite vocal about how much people need to, like, really take responsibility for themselves. Now, she does do Zoom calls, you know, with groups, and she does do live events, and I'm just letting people know, because I've seen people go into that group and leave very quickly feeling somewhat, I suppose, humiliated, I guess, which is not, you know, I can understand both sides of that situation, because some people are a little bit entitled, and on at the same time it can be easy, I think, to forget just how frightening it can feel for people who have their entire lives been indoctrinated into the mentality of, you know, fearing authority and fearing the consequences or repercussions if they speak up for themselves or challenge anything. I understand, you know, I've literally at times had situations where I've been like literally physically shaking just reading a email or a letter that's come through, and, you know, I also, let me say this, I'm not presenting myself as anyone who is, you know, out there leading the way, the epitome of how best to handle all this stuff. There's been things I've set in motion, and then everything else that I've had going on this last couple of years, things have just fallen by the wayside. You know, I've not responded to things that I should have, and so there's always a, you know, once a ball starts rolling, there's always going to be a consequence to if you don't then continue to stand your ground with things. So, you know, that's manifested itself as some, yeah, quite a number of defaults on my credit rating and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not so worried about it now that I've got my head around more of this stuff. I do realise that there is ways and means to rectify pretty much any and all of it. So it's, you know, I'm like, it is what it is. I do need to redress it. I do need to put things, you know, set the record straight, let's say. But for anyone who this is either very new, and or let's say you work in the sector in finance, for instance, you know, things like that can be a big deal for your professional standing, or, yeah, so, you know, I get it. I understand why people are not going to want to just gung-ho, like some people will, but a lot of people are not just going to want to be like, yeah, anarchy, you know. At the same time, there is so much valuable information now available. There are so many tools that are now available. There's so many support groups that are now available, that anybody who genuinely does want to challenge their status in these systems are in a situation where if they want to, they can. It's a matter of choice at that point. So, you know, that's the main reason I wanted to share these. Okay, so this I talked about in the God, Source, Creator, Sovereignty session. Towards the latter half of that, I talked about Richard Werner, who explained how money comes to be. So as you can see, the title of this video, and this comes from Big Picture YouTube channel, it's only a small clip of a longer video that they posted. But they have titled it "Banks Make Money Out of Nothing." And I've put a note here to say, well, that's not strictly true as such. It is what Richard Werner says. So, you know, they're not wrong. But the money's not being created out of nothing. It's being created off the back of each and every one of our signatures. So it's the sign of nature that activates the instrument. It authorizes the instrument that then allows for that money to be created. So I wanted to play the clip because it's one thing me saying, you know, Richard Werner's proven this, but I want you to hear it from him, because if you understand this, you can understand basically the basis as to why any and all quote unquote alleged debt is false, is fraudulent, because he or she who creates owns. And when you understand that principle, then you can understand, as the creator of the currency, how and why you have been unlawfully converted into being a debtor, for instance. And it does extend out into such as cost of utilities and all of that kind of stuff as well, which I'm not going to, this is not a lecture, you know, this whole session is about proving that solutions have been available and they've been dismissed or shut down or argued against by someone who claims to want to see humanity pulled together and, you know, change the world, and is actively doing the opposite. But because this is the topic that we're talking about, I wanted to show you this because I want as many people as possible to really understand. I know there is a lot of programming on the one hand, and on an emotional level, a lot of fear, guilt, shame, all of those heavy emotions attached. When it comes to money, certainly when it comes to debt, people feel a sense of shame around not having enough of it. And if they haven't had enough of it and they've had to quote unquote borrow it, I think they deserve to know that you didn't borrow anything, you created it. And you have every right to receive anything and everything that you need in assistance with your life, to cover your basic needs, to put food on the table, to have a roof over your head. You have every right to access the resources that this planet offers. And, you know, that ties back into that God, Source, Creator, Sovereignty session, because it's the mind shift that needs to happen around this. Okay, so let me just play this for you. In fact, just
My name is Professor Richard Werner. I'm Professor of Banking and Economics. There have been 3 different theories of how banks work and how they operate for the past century or more. And you can find famous economists supporting each of these 3 theories. And yet there hadn't been any scientific sort of conclusive study on the question of, well, okay, which one is true? The one that is currently dominant and is in your textbooks, will be taught mostly at the universities, and even the regulators and the banks themselves are using in a lot of their publications, is the financial intermediation theory, which says that each bank is just an intermediary. It gathers deposits, and then it makes decisions on how to lend this money. There was another theory called the fractional reserve theory. It says each individual bank is just a financial intermediary that gathers deposits, does the analysis, and then lends to various borrowers. It says that, well, when these banks then interact with each other, collectively something happens and they create money. Now, there's a third one, and that's the oldest. And this one says, no, banks are not financial intermediaries. Each individual bank creates money out of nothing when it gives out a loan. The money for the loan that the borrower receives is actually newly created, didn't exist beforehand, and is newly injected in the economy, added to the money supply. You have different people supporting, these different theories, but which one is true? I mean, what is the scientific thing to do? It's to do an empirical test. Now, the trouble is to conduct a proper empirical test, a scientific test, you need a bank to cooperate with you. I mean, there's no way around that. You have to take a real loan from the bank, and you have to actually take the money, and you have to be able to look inside the bank and see exactly what it's doing as you take the loan, and what sort of transactions take place in their accounting, which means nowadays obviously in their IT system. I asked the big banks. Initially, each bank is very positive and wants to be helpful. A professor wants to study banking. Sure, of course we can help. But when it became clear that, no, I do need to look into your system and actually monitor very carefully and record what you are doing, they're all like, oh, hang on, And well, there's various reasons being told. I mean, there's for example, confidentiality, although, as a researcher, you can get exempted and you sign various statements that you're not going to use any individual customer information, obviously. These were obstacles that seemed more excuses because you could overcome them. I did find a small bank in the end that thought, okay, well, why not do this experiment? It was quite representative, though, despite this being a small bank, because it was one of the many German cooperative banks that account for actually the largest number of banks in Germany and Europe. And they all use the same accounting and IT system. And so it is very representative. And I took out a real loan myself, 200,000 euros. When the bank gives the money to the borrower, that was me, where does it come from? Where is it booked from? What does the accounting look like? What does the internal IT transaction look like? And so the financial intermediation theory says that it should be I should be using deposits. So there must be some kind of reflection in their recording of deposits. The fractional reserve theory says that you're lending excess reserves. The banks need to have reserves from the central bank or at the central bank that will be used for the new loan. And the credit creation theory says banks create the money out of nothing. You don't need to book or transfer money from anywhere else. And the conclusion was what we found. They didn't touch any deposits. They didn't touch any reserves. They didn't even check their reserves. The money was clearly newly created out of nothing, and I was credited with it, and I could withdraw it because it was now in the system.
Okay, so I'm sorry that froze. I don't know why that didn't play with him animated, but you heard what he had to say, which, really think about that for a second as well, from the point of view of what Kim has been claiming, that the experiments, he did two, in fact. The first one was 2014, I believe, the second 2017, I think, where on the first occasion, they'd been allowed to look into the systems of the bank. But because things, transactions are coming in and out all the time, people are using debit cards, paying for stuff online, it can be a bit of a lag depending what kind of payment processor is being used and all of that. So they saw that there'd be no transfer in for the amount that he'd asked for. So therefore it didn't come from any, external source. Also, the reserves, as he said there, had not even been checked, so it didn't come out of reserves. So he has said in a number of his interviews, it's very carefully worded when you apply for a loan and if that's approved, which we'll talk about, in a minute. What happens to the instruments then that aren't approved if, we apply for a loan or a credit card or something and that money isn't given to us and unlawfully converted into a debt that we're being told we owe, we have to repay. So he saw that it had not come from reserves. He saw that it had not been transferred in from anywhere else, from any other customer deposits or anything. But because of the various transactions, they hadn't been able to boil it down to the precise inception. What he talks about is they will say very, carefully worded, you will find it in your account. So they don't say we'll transfer it into your account. They don't say we'll release it from reserves into your account. They don't say anything like that. They say you'll find it in your account by whenever, this afternoon, within 24 hours, whatever. So for those who are following Kim's information, what I would say is really think about that. Both of these experiments were done within the period of time that Kim has been, quote unquote, the one authorizing all money creation, all currency creation. And according to her, that can't happen without her releasing allocation codes and, So how then has this money and any and every other loan and, credit card or, whatever, mortgages, all of that, how have they been created then if it requires her authorization and she hasn't been authorizing it? What he's just said there, if you really understand that, it disproves that claim that Kim has been making. But as far as when we apply for stuff, so we give our authorization, our sign of nature. As we know, this all ties in with the credit scoring thing. They want to know the credit score is and I'm taking this from Stacey's World Rocks because she says this all the time. It's a compliance check. It's a check to see how likely you are to repay that amount, because what they want to know is just how profitable it's going to be for them. When that instrument is created, they already have your authorization to claim from within the system through the securities markets and all of that stuff, the value of that. So whether you get it or not, the bank does, or whichever other institution. So that's worth thinking about. And there's many other processes that it ties in with a lot of Brandon Joe Williams information. There's other processes connected to banking that there are many things we could claim back that we just don't know that. So they get considered to be abandoned, and the banks themselves or whichever other institutions claim them on our behalf, because you've got a period of around 3 years, I think it is. So if you don't reclaim those instruments, the value of those instruments in that period of time, then the institutions themselves have every right to class them as abandoned and claim them back and keep that. So this is why it's definitely worth looking into this information, because in terms of the immediate stuff, obviously we start with the stuff you're not too scared about and worried about, but beyond that, the scope is huge for the difference it could make for your day-to-day financial situation if you've got the time, and if it's something you feel drawn to, because not everyone's going to be cut from the cloth that is overly enthusiastic about this type of information. And I understand that, because honestly, there's some of it I get very excited about, more from the empowerment point of view, and then there's other aspects of it. I've been and bought myself, big tomes of like law dictionaries and equity and trust law and contract law books and all of that. And some of it I find very interesting, and other parts of it, I kind of lose the will to live a little bit, because I'm not. We're each and all guided by our own organic soul transmissions, aren't we? So I'm just letting you know what is being established, has been established, and is worth looking into if it can help you. Okay, so I'm not going to play this. This is another clip, but rather than make it too much of a training session, the title of this is "The Reason You Are Already Debt-Free." It's all about trusts. It's on the Sovereign Empowerment YouTube channel. It's one of the earlier videos that they did. Definitely worth checking out. It's not a long video. I think in total it's only about 15 minutes, something like that, but very useful information, and it does reinforce again what I was talking about in that God Source Creator Sovereignty session. And I talked about from the backside, our soul transmission is the trusteeship, but coming through into the physical and material reality, when we sign something, when we actually take action in this physical material reality, we act in that capacity as the settlor. The trustee then becomes whoever's supposed to administer what we've signed for. So if we've applied for a loan, as an example, the trustee would then be whoever that financial institution is. They are supposed to administer those funds to you, and in the world of effect, on the experiencer side of it, you then become the beneficiary. So you give the value initially with your signature. That then creates the currency. The currency then is given to you, but as we know, what happens in between within that agreement is an unlawful conversion, but that's provable, and there's law and legislation that supports our rights, our claims of what is rightfully ours, that supersedes any and all statutes and the lower level jurisdictions, that is what is being used to kind of bully us into carrying on with this facade. So it's worth listening to that and understanding that, and there's signposts to resources that can help with that as well in that video. All right, so let's come back to the debt relinquishment plan. So that's the type of stuff I've been looking at. I'm not saying I'd engage with all of that, because I hadn't, but I'd started to get the basic gist of the argument that we are ultimately the creditors, not the debtors. And because I were believing that there was this whole takeover of the financial system happening, it seemed very plausible to me at the time that there could and should be a way that the two worlds could collide, let's say. So this were all, to me, very much the grassroots stuff. What Kim was talking about, she was doing, was the higher level stuff. And I thought, this is a way that we can sort of bridge the gap between and have something that people can really start to invest time and energy into, therefore taking action, therefore gaining benefits, therefore generating the redirection of currency that can then start to feed and fuel and fund some of the lower level projects in terms of expense. And it's proof to people that change really is happening, which then becomes a, for lack of a better expression, selling point in terms of drawing more attention to the assemblies and to the other groups that were working on different aspects of, whether it were health or environmental stuff or education or all of that. So this was the plan. debt relinquishment plan, giving power back to the people and proving change is here. I was so optimistic. All right, so starting off just with the energetics of it, in order to give, you must receive, because if you don't, you've got nothing to give. In order to receive, you must give. So in this case, I was talking about, we've got to give stuff up. We've got to relinquish our attachment to and involvement in and participation of the existing systems, and instead start a new cycle, some new systems of our own. And it's got to start somewhere, and one place it could start is there's already proof out there that we don't have to continue to participate in. What I should also mention as well is at that time Kim had done sessions where she talked in detail about how when you're paying your credit card bills, for instance, the deep state and various intelligence agencies, part of the deep state, they all had backdoors into, MasterCard and Visa. And she had literally said multiple times, when we were paying that stuff, that money, some of it, if not all of it, was going to those agencies, and they were using our payment for goods and services that we were utilizing, such as credit cards and whatnot, for. When we were repaying that, we were lining their pockets. They were using that money essentially to enact crimes against us. That was her stance. That's what she told us. So you can imagine, to me, it was ludicrous that we would want to continue doing that. So went into some of the frequency. There's a big difference between, this is a graphic that I'd got from online. It obviously relates to David Hawkins' work, the transcending levels of consciousness and the maps of consciousness. Big difference between being in that state of apathy and what can I do about it, and then a more empowered, I'm going to stand up for myself, and I'm going to work with other people that also know how to do that and feel that way. And, together we can generate energy that is very much signaling to whatever system I believed, at the time Kim were using, generating energy and signaling to that system. Like, we don't just want change in a please one day. Instead, we're ready for it now, and we're not just ready and willing and waiting. We're actually, it's happening. We're doing it. So this is the stuff I was talking about with my friend on that call. Again, more information about it I've highlighted here. My friend had used the analogy of Stockholm syndrome. She talked about, a lot of people being in that state of but we can't survive without, the powers that be sort of governing things for us. And again, I've said this in a previous session, I'm not suggesting we want all out revolution in the sort of social and political sense as we know it. Revolution to me is rapid evolution. We do want that, but we don't want violence. We don't want people obviously in states of despair and or fear, which is, we're seeing that anyway. This is the thing, we're seeing that as a result of inaction and as a result of people not understanding that there are alternatives available. So, I understand why people are hesitant and resistant to a lot of this information, because there's been a whole lot of propaganda around, like, oh, sovereign citizens and people ending up in prison, and But if you look at the information, such as the sources that I've just recommended, they explain not only how it can be done and show the results and show the proof of it, but they also explain where, you know, a lot of this propaganda has come into it to scare people and to stop people from pursuing it. So, you know, it does alleviate a lot of that fear. But my friend, she was talking about, you know, people just being too frightened to do anything and thinking, you know, the better the devil you know sort of thing. And still, despite so much information saying otherwise, still believing that the people that are quote unquote elected and or selected to be in power, you know, they're the best people for the job and all of that. So we talked about that clip that got sent over to the global team. They'd heard us talking about that, and I was highlighting that, you know, essentially it's just a state thing. It's what emotional state you're in. If you understand this in relationship to the densities, when I did the planes of existence and the densities session, there's a lot more to say about all of that. But, you know, as an overlay, David Hawkins' map of consciousness is such a significant and powerful tool. And, you know, what he developed through applied kinesiology was essentially a tool and technique that can be used that literally allows us to measure, to monitor the degree to which our organic soul transmission is being allowed to transmit in, through, and from us, because that's what the whole signal testing, he called it muscle testing. But to me, we're not measuring and monitoring the strength of the muscle. We're measuring and monitoring the strength of the signal that's passing through the tissues of the body, right? So that his whole body of work is highly significant to understanding how we can begin to gain more awareness in terms of what it is that we're acting as a conduit for, you know, in frequency range. So we talked about some of that stuff as well, and highlighting those two sort of separate categories at the bottom there. What we talked about is that there's a lot of people who were getting involved with the assemblies and wanting to take action, but even they were still very much in that state of agitation and frustration with the systems, with the situation. And I have to say, when I look back, a lot of Kim's content fueled that, you know, and when that was highlighted at times, she would change her tone and she would shift into a more, you know, it's all good, everything's great. But many of her updates and reports were very much about you know, how evil the deep state are and all of the disgusting things they were doing and all of that. So, you know, we were talking about that, and we were talking about how beyond those people who were just riled up and ready for change, there were a whole lot of other people that were just like, why bother? You know, what can we do about it? So we were talking about ways that we could essentially inspire people and motivate people and excite people. And so again, nothing excites people more than having more money. So if there's legal, lawful, rightful ways that that could happen, you know, why not bring that to the forefront of, you know, the information? So yeah, so I was talking about how I believed any system Kim were using, if it were fueled by source energy, had to be connected, integrated to the overarching operating system of reality. Reality as a very sophisticated, organic, essentially simulation. But what I mean by that is it's God source creator experiencing and expressing self in all different forms, and that includes all of us. So that being the organic simulation. So I was saying, whatever system Kim's working with, it's connected to the overarching operating system, organically speaking, and therefore, because we're all integrated into that, we're all representations of that, it's responding to us as much as it's responding to anything else. It must be responding to us. So if we're saying we don't want to participate in the old systems anymore, but then we are, there's a mixed message there, right? It's, that's what I talked about earlier. It's a split energy. We're saying we don't want it, but then we're acting as we do. So, that's going to dilute or interfere with whatever it's mapping, whatever it's reading in terms of frequency for the signals that we're putting out there. So by what, benefits, if we stop paying for certain things, if it's truly rightful, legal, lawful for us not to, what's it going to do for us? So it's going to fight against defunct fraudulent systems, which again, I've already said, that's all the information we were being told, that none of that stuff was, with agreement or charter or contract, and we could and should have every right to refute and refuse and revoke any implied consent that we'd given. Organisations and groups trying to harm, enslave, kill us, because again, if we were paying into these things and these things were going to pay for these operations that were being run against us, it makes no sense whatsoever to carry on doing it. At the time, I believed, it would also help to fight against the efforts of the deep state trying to stop and block and interfere with Kim and, what the global teams were doing, and the operation of the global repository. And it would also counter a lot of lies and disinformation that are out there. So they all seemed like good reasons. So how could it work? So this is all a bit irrelevant now, because obviously it was never going to go anywhere, but I didn't know that at the time. So I detailed, I'm not going to read it all out to you. Feel free to pause and read it if you want, but this is how we could do it, let people know on the live calls, and they can recommend it to other people, and this is what could go on the website as and when that gets set up. And then, this could take them to this video, and that'll explain it all to them, and then they can get signposted to this other information. And what I was suggesting was that, given that Kim had claimed the global repository had a blanket sort of guardianship for all global assets and all the debt instruments, that it shouldn't have been a problem if people started submitting information about, I've got this much debt with this institution, a loan for this much, a credit card for that much. If people started submitting this information, it could quite easily, using databases, collate. I weren't entirely sure how it would. I'm just trying to look. Yeah, so I wasn't, that's obviously a very simple form, but I wasn't entirely sure whether it would get grouped into, lending institutions, or would it be by country or whatever. But as you look on these, I was sort of saying, for people that are really scared about the process, it would be good if they got like a confirmation that by submitting this information, one, the debts were, I don't even want to say forgiven, because they're alleged debts, they're not truly debts. You are the creditor, so you don't owe that money. But I knew a lot of people at the time, because I was one of them, would want something, some official notice, something to say, if someone comes at me and says, we're going to take you to court, we're going to bankrupt you, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I knew there'd be a need for them to have something that they could be like, actually, no, I think you'll find this has been written off against the debts owed to us, the people, because a lot of the money that's been created and spent on this planet for a very long time has it's being claimed on our behalf and then spent however other people have wanted it to be spent. We've had no real say in the matter, and it's owed back to us. So, just writing off some debts against that shouldn't have been a problem. Bearing in mind at the time, Kim was also telling people that she'd brought in, I think it was something like 1.74 trillion to write off student debts and stuff. That I think that was 2020 possibly. Yeah, so to say that, she told people she brought that money in for Trump and for Trump to pay off student debts, and there were some other things he was supposed to do as well that she claimed later she'd pulled that money back because he hadn't done those things. But if she could do it in that sense, I don't see why within her all singing, all dancing system she couldn't just, adjust the figures to show that a whole bunch of people no longer, it wouldn't need to be done person by person. I'm sure there's a way that you could batch these things. It was a very simple process that I laid out, but I thought, so as long as people are actually taking action, the job is getting done and change is happening and people are going to be better off, and all of the benefits that can come from that in terms of what we could use some of that money for, if as and where people were willing to do so, if they were willing to contribute to getting some of these projects off the ground, we could have been helping a lot of people and changing things. So that's all, me sort of going, I'm not entirely sure how the records would need to be kept, but these are ways that we possibly could do that. Then a recap of, so this is how it could work. We'll let people know in these ways, this is what they'll get access to, this is what they then need to do themselves, this is how that's going to have a knock-on effect with us funding certain things and so on. So overall benefits, something to promote that doesn't require funds coming through from the backside system, because it were all what's already in existence, currency that's already circulating, so we can deal with that. It does affect a lot of people. I did make the point, I do realise for anyone who wasn't in a position where they had debt, they might see it as, that's not fair, these people are benefiting before anything's coming through for us. But I thought anybody who was awake and aware enough to be attending to this kind of information could at least understand that it's a mechanism to shift the flow of energy. So yes, people can start to benefit, but the knock-on effect is going to be that we can then start to bring funding through for other people for other things. Wouldn't take too long or require much in the way of resources to get it set up. A lot of the information were already out there. We just needed people within the assemblies or within the different groups to kind of get the head around it and understand it better, so they could support people with that information and or ensure that the information on the website and stuff was as accurate and clear as possible. And it's a way to connect people to everything that's going on. So they were all wins as far as I were concerned. Potential scale, so these stats were true for 2021. I've not been back and checked them since, but as you can see, there's some significant figures involved, particularly I would say when you look at, based on that idea of there being money that's just going to fund agencies and groups that are using that money to harm us, That for me at the time was a key focus, because I was like, well, you know, in interest payments alone, just in the UK, there's an average of £121 million per day that we collectively are essentially paying to harm ourselves. So I'm thinking, let's not do that. Let's change our direction and, you know, also see people relax a little bit and, you know, have some relief from some of the stresses that a lot of these types of debts create for us. So then I went through some more stats, you know, 318 people a day declared insolvent and bankrupt. That's every 4 minutes and 31 seconds someone's life is collapsing in on them. Every 11 hours and 22 minutes a property is repossessed in the UK. That's a whole lot of homeless people. So as I've said there, this could help a lot of people and wake a lot up. And again, they were just UK stats, so, you know, try and extrapolate that out globally, what that could do. So then I'd put some other things to think about. Advice and support for repurposing of business, because I'm thinking, as soon as this information gets out, you know, everyone's going to want to get in on that action, and then things are going to change so quickly. There's going to be whole aspects of the financial sectors that, you know, they no longer are needed in terms of, you know, they're not going to be lending institutions anymore. They're just going to act as intermediaries to bring the funds through for people, and, you know, there's going to need to be a repurposing of that, and it's going to be a lot of people, when they learn the truth, probably not even going to want to be involved in that sort of sector anymore. And so I highlighted, could a knowledge assurance card be a viable option? Now, the reason I'd included that is because somewhere, and I've done a timeline thing coming up, but somewhere between me and my friend having that initial discussion on the 17th of July, I believe that same evening, because my friend had said, you know, this is such a good idea and I really think people are going to be excited about this. I really want to, because she was good friends with Tank at the time, and Tank at that time was, he was staying at Kim's house. He'd been there for a number of weeks, I believe. I am willing to sort of caveat this by saying this is from memory, because I've tried to go back and double check the dates of certain reports, and I can't find the original source material to fact check myself to be absolutely sure that my memory is not playing tricks on me. I think what happened is, me and my friend had that conversation on Sunday the 17th in the afternoon, UK time. That evening, a Life Force update, the Sunday evening call that were a regular thing at the time, 9 p.m. UK time on a Sunday. That call, I believe, then introduced health assurance. And I've got a clip coming up that can show you the reveal of it, this new plan, this new idea to help people were going to be an initiative that were getting started. I'm sure I'd never, up to the point where me and my friend had that discussion, I'm sure I'd never heard anything about assurance up to that point. That evening that was announced, and I can't help but think possibly it was as a result of the discussion me and my friend had had. I hadn't sent this plan over until the Friday the 22nd, but I know the discussion had been relayed, let's say. Now, I could be entirely wrong about this. Maybe the health assurance idea had been in the pipeline for a long time before that, and maybe something else had sparked the announcement of it. But I know I'd not heard about it at the time that me and my friend had the conversation, but somewhere between us having that conversation and me putting this plan together to send over to her, the health assurance had been announced, and that's why I included, could a knowledge assurance card be a viable option, as in, you know, if we're going to be providing people with cards that essentially act like a debit card that covers the cost of certain things, because here I'm talking about people retraining, maybe there could be a card that does the same thing. So it's, you know, the way it was being described was that money would essentially be loaded onto that card that could be used for specific types of activities. So the health insurance card for anything medical, or, you know, I'll play you the clip because Kim and Tang did that session together where they announced it and they talked about all the different stuff that we're going to cover. But me asking this question, like, could the same model be used but for education, basically, is what I were asking. So this is the Life Force Assurance announcement, which the only clip I could find of it to play it for you was from Team Bubba's channel, because they've been keeping the records that they have. They didn't post it until November of 2021, but for me to have included it on that plan in July, obviously the announcement had come out prior, and I honestly think, from my memory, it had happened from me having that discussion with my friend. That very evening, this got announced, and then I referenced it in the plan that I sent over on the Friday, which were a few days after. So let me play this for you so you can see for yourself what was being told to us at the time.
Have been notified there are no fees to join this association, and yet they get to reap all the benefits of access to all the technologies and lots of grants to implement healthcare. Oh, the World Health Organization underneath the United Nations has also been replaced by Life Force Health and Wellness. And I know the Life Force Health and Wellness team is looking for a catchy little name that they want to name themselves globally. So everybody's going to be looking to them now, no pressure, guys and ladies, for solutions, right? Health and wellness solutions. The IMF has been replaced by the Key Integrated Monetary System. It's all automated. We really don't need an IMF, and we really don't need a Federal Reserve to help us out because it's all automated, right?
That's right.
And we make one change, then it gets changed everywhere. These are unnecessary people, right?
Yeah.
And so the take a peacekeeping forces, right, of the UN, right? They take a piece of everything. That's also life force enforcement. Yeah. So we're kind of like all just doing our own thing over here, right?
But what's profound is this is all going to be visible to the world. This isn't something that will be kept secret.
Yep.
You know,
not for long.
Right.
Now remember something too, that the United Nations, right, was formed and signed off on by unknown country and unformed by the same organization, right? Their sovereignty revoked, their contracts and treaties revoked. And so now we have the right to put something in its place if we chose it. So for right now, this is what we've got, right? We need an authority. And I highly doubt that Life Force Health and Wellness is going to be funding the CDC and the FDA and the NHS and the United Kingdom. And why do we not need this third-party entity to determine what our insurance companies will pay for and not pay for?
Life Force Assurance.
Right. So we are also launching this week something called Life Force Assurance. Life Force Assurance is a replacement for insurance. It's basically a debit card that is coded for all things health and wellness, right? It'll pay for your vitamins. It'll pay for your supplements. It'll pay for your essential oils. You can choose a naturopathic doctor, or you can choose to go to a regular doctor if you want. If you are on certain medications that you can't get off of immediately, or you don't want to get off of, it'll pay for that too. if that's what you're so choosing. You can now get treatment anywhere in the world. It's available to you. Also, travel expenses are covered, right? So Life Force Assurance will also pay for spa treatments, right? Because that's essential to health and wellness and self-esteem in a lot of different cases, right?
Even things
Sure.
like that might just be self-esteem based, cosmetic surgery.
Or something like that. But that's still important to some people, right? So dental.
Very important.
Very important to your health all around. Yeah.
But Kim, what about our animals?
Oh, we have Life Force Assurance for animals as well, right?
Yes. How about that?
Yep. And we'll pick and choose the healthiest foods for them. And if that is the food that is free to you under your assurance plan. Yep.
So it will cover things that are the best possible things for your health.
Eye care, LASIK surgery, all these things that you would normally have to pay for out of pocket. Plastic surgery if you've had a cancer or something like that.
Or if you've had
right?
Or 3 C-sections.
Yeah.
Right?
Or you lost 100 pounds or 200
you got
pounds.
extra skin.
Yeah. All that's covered, right? It should be. Right. Because you need to be restored to your, happy, healthy.
The best version of you.
Best version of you, right.
And not only that, but things that are toxic and known to be toxic and dangerous for people. Really, with all these different changes, those things, the way the system appears to work, and this is best my understanding of it, it appears that though they wouldn't even be able to get money for it.
Well, we also will have a replacement for what you call food stamps or food assistance, right? But we're hoping to see if we can get right now, if you have food assistance in the US, you can't buy certain things, right? Like you can't buy toilet paper, for example. It just won't go on the card, right? Or whatever it is you're getting these days, right? So with ours, it'll actually make choices, right? This product contains chemicals known to harm the human body. Do you wish? We're moving on. We're moving forward.
Okay, so that we're going to go into a different clip there, but you get the gist. So that's what we were all being told, and as you can imagine, we're all very excited by that. I didn't at the time see it as a way to counter any encouragement for us to still stand in our sovereignty when it comes to how the financial systems run. Later down the line, I did, in fact, I think it was the very next update, I've put a note of it. Let's see on the next slide. Yeah, so this was the timeline as I remember it. So Sunday, 17th of July, me and my friend had the discussion, which is what I sent the clip over to her. That was early afternoon UK time. That evening, I believe that's when assurance was announced. Friday the 22nd is when I sent over the more, fleshed out sort of plan based on what we discussed. So I then sent the UK Assembly proposal that I'd already submitted to the Assembly as well, so that they could see, what I'd said in that. And I also sent, if you noticed on those messages, a link to a meditation, because again, I think I've already said this now, we talked about sort of aligning with our organic soul transmissions, that being energy source coding, that being, the more of that flowing through us, the more aligned with that, the more we're connecting to what I believed was a source powered system that Kim was working with. So Sunday the 24th, then, the very next update after that, Lisa did a meditation with us all, so that we could connect with Source to get the funding to come through. Nothing ever happened with the debt relinquishment plan. Kim did mention debt in that call, but told people they wouldn't have to worry about it because the assurance card and the pet assurance card and then she talked about Life Force Essentials card, which was going to cover other everyday costs and or living expenses. Because all of that were coming out, you know, none of us would have to worry about money anyway. So she didn't say it, but what that implied was, so just keep paying what you're paying, despite the fact that, you know, according to other intel that I've shared with you, it's paying to, you know, fight against you. But at the time, we were all very excited. And didn't ask too many questions, and even myself, having sent that over, didn't, you know. So in that video, the Team Bubba reactions, where they're saying, you know, if you still believe in this crap, you're all idiots. I was one of the idiots, but you know, I have every bit of empathy for anybody who is still very invested in Kim's information, because I was and would still be, had I not had the experience that I've had since I sent that content over in February 2024, had I not had the attacks that I've had I not watched her willfully use and misuse my content in a very dishonest kind of way, that's been the wake-up call for me, you know. So for anybody and everybody else who's still invested and hasn't experienced that, I get it, I understand, because I will hook, line and sinker. No part of me has found it easy to believe someone would be that disingenuous. Honestly, I still think it's shocking, but you know, we're all different. All right, so just as a little bit of extra proof that, you know, Kim has continued, and obviously we're in 2025 now. At some point, I'll do a different session and put a compilation, and maybe we'll do it as an annual review of each year that Kim has declared categorically, that's it, we're in the light age, this is done, they're, you know, there've no moves left, they're bankrupt, they're this, they're that. There's been so many times that she has in so many different ways. This is from 2022, so you know, I sent over that debt relinquishment plan in July of 2021, having had in the January the declaration that we were, you know, fully into the golden age at that point. That was about 4 years ago. But this is another example of Kim continuing with that narrative, and how all of the institutions and organizations, all defunct, all you know, no longer able to operate. So let me play this for you.
But it's just,
The Dark Overlord had returned to source several months ago. They thought there was a hope of a replacement, and they would once again gain access to their beloved demons. No replacement came, no angel of death appointed. His bride Isis also returned back to source, and their lower astral beings slowly wilted away. On the 7th of January 2022, the covenant known as the Gales of Indiscretion was terminated. Moreover, the covenant of source. On the 7th of January 2022, the terrestrial storm finally ended, bringing about the day of reparation. We are now free to begin the restoration of Earth, the beginning of a whole new ecosystem, exactly as nature had intended it, precisely as God, the creator of benevolent source, intended it to be. So what does this mean for humanity in practical terms? The Hall of Records sent expiration and termination notices on Monday to every sector of the Dark Overlord's governances. All Earth's secret societies, all false religious structures, all governments, all agencies, the laws of sin and death, all control structures completely gone in less than 3 days. All central bank licenses terminated, the United Nations, IMF, World Bank, development banks, Federal Reserve, all reserve banks, and much more gone.
completely gone.
So that was Team Bubba again, obviously. Said it a few times, just going to reinforce it. there are very few other places. There's certain things, some documents and whatnot. There's a couple of Telegram channels that have been doing some digging into Kim's background and some of her claims, and they've been useful for that. And people have shared information on there about their experiences of, you know, investing time, energy, their own expenditure, to try to get things up and running and off the ground, and only to have it, you know, squashed and dismissed or ignored and, you know, stopped, blocked. But there is a clip I'll show you before the end of this of another person who's highlighting that, you know, that has happened at every level, from, you know, each of the iterations of the global team that's happened, as people have come and gone. Other people have kind of taken their positions and still wanted, you know, to see things get off the ground. And I no longer think it's just unfortunate, you know, I think it's by design that that's not ever seemingly getting anywhere, because I don't think it's ever been meant to get anywhere. So yeah, everything, you know, 3 days all wiped out, but 3 years later and everything's still very much going.
But
Oh, sorry.
it's
Let's come off. All right, so as I've put here, I'm just moving myself out of the way so I'm not covering the writing here. So since I started recording these newer sessions, that, you know, the first one I recorded on the 20th of May 2025, I have noticed from things that are being shared online that Kim has gone full we the people, you know, she wants everybody to know the power that they have. And I know she's done some sessions now explaining everything that I've been explaining, but leaving out the key components of how you can actually challenge any of the systems and where to find that information if you want to. But we the people, you know, she just wants to work with the people, and if we all unify, we're unstoppable. She did the same thing when I sent the content in February 2024. I'd highlighted in that just how significant it was that out of 8 billion people in the world, you know, roughly that's what we're told the global population is, those of us, those, you know, somewhere in the region of 20 to 40,000 people that had been attracted to Kim's information, there was a purpose to that. There's a, you know, there's an intelligent design driving that in terms of our soul transmissions, our passions, our aspirations, what's calling us to want to affect positive change in this world. It's not by accident. And, you know, I really wanted to emphasize to people that that says a lot, that, you know, you are as invested and as committed to seeing positive change on the planet. And at the time, you know, in February 2024, I was saying that from the place of we're in exactly the right place. And, you know, we just need to start to put certain things into action. Obviously, since then, my view has changed greatly in terms of that being the right place to channel as attention and as time and as energy. I actually think it's a massive trap, but the point doesn't change in terms of I still agree that we the people, change is going to come in through and from us, and so we need a more coordinated effort and, you know, focus when it comes to creating that, because it can feel very ad hoc and very, there's that many different things, you know, there's that many negative things affecting that many different people in that many different ways. Where to begin? And given there's still no sign of any funding coming out anytime soon, I would say freeing up some of the currency that's already in existence and or generating new currency but from a different mindset would be a good place to start, because then, you know, we can coordinate some efforts to actually invest in some of the projects that people have been ready, willing, waiting, wanting to get off the ground for years at this point. So I agree, but what we the people have been trying to do in response to Kim is exactly that. We've been trying to work with Kim. Thousands of people have been trying to work with Kim. What example has she set? Because I've seen time and time and time again, people either reaching out, offering help, services to get involved, and it's never time, you know, Kim will be letting everybody know when she's ready, despite having claimed multiple occasions that she's got thousands of people working behind the scenes with GIA and all this kind of stuff. Are you telling me that there's no vetting process whereby some of these people reaching out to you, offering their expertise, their services, there's no way they can be considered for recruitment then? That seems a bit odd. And why then shut down assemblies? You know, Kim's answer at the time was that we the people just weren't ready for it, which on the one hand, according to Kim, you know, we're all celestial beings and we're powering the entire multiverse and there's nothing more brilliant than us. But yet, if you understand anything about the basics of group dynamics and group life cycles, all that was happening in those assemblies were they were, it's what we would refer to as the storming. You know, if you understand what's his name? Bruce Tuckman. He did the group life cycle model where it was forming, storming, i.e., you know, you have your battle of the wills and battle of the egos, and people need to sort of figure out, you know, I guess to some extent, you know, the pecking order sort of thing. And there's going to be some disagreement on what best to focus on. And but that's all part and parcel. You know, good leadership requires mediation when it comes to that, but it certainly shouldn't be an excuse to abandon something as important as this. You know, we're talking about the restoration of the planet, we're talking about global change, we're talking about people actually being empowered to live in alignment with their true, authentic, organic selves. I don't think some petty arguments and stuff really are a good excuse to decide that humanity's just not ready. Let's just bail on that, you know. But that was the response at the time, and I do think there was more to it than that, but that it would require a whole other tangent to go off on, so I'll save that and I'll integrate that to another video at some other point. But that was the excuse that was given. There was too much bickering and jostling for, you know, power, you know, people wanting to, and there was some of that going on. I were involved and I were on receiving end of certain people, you know, wanting to kind of assert their authority and whatnot, and it's part and parcel of group dynamics, different personality types, different agendas, different ideas, you know, it happens. Didn't need to shut down any and every assembly. There are assemblies all around the world at that point, and you know, more people wanting to get involved. So Kim says this is what she wants and she'd rather work with the people, but yet when those opportunities have been gaining momentum, Kim's been the one to say we're not ready for that and that needs to be shut down. And just to be clear, we each and all have to take responsibility for what we accept, you know, in terms of what, just because that was her opinion, could things have continued? Could people still have been working together and getting stuff going? Yeah, but that's testament to me to the mentality that's being cultivated through Kim's quote unquote leadership, her guardianship. is that everyone needs to look to Kim for permission, for the answers, for the solutions. You know, everything has to come from her, and if it doesn't, then people don't seem to have confidence in any other option, any other pathway, which in and of itself, you know, I've done a whole lot of listening to the different podcasts and testimonies from people talking about how cults operate this past few months. And there is like, it's funny because in the past I'd seen that people had called it a cult, and I was very dismissive of that. I was very quick to be not heavily offended, because in my own somewhat arrogant state, I was sort of like, you just don't know, or it's because you don't know the ins and outs of it. You don't know enough information to have that opinion, so therefore you're wrong and I'm right. Which is funny when I think about it, but yeah. We live and we learn. But the truth of it is, Kim is very good at the lip service. She's very good at convincing people that she says what she means and she means what she says. And yet there's, even just within this one session, I've shown multiple ways that she's adamantly, asserted certain things as fact, as truth, as reality. And there's been absolutely no substance and no result from it. So the only solutions I've seen Kim come up with is stuff that she can sell, whether it's her own information or other products. And when it comes to her information, I now know how much of that is either stolen from other people and or just made up. And people are paying for that as the quote unquote real news and the real history and the real this, and it's literally the opposite. Which I'm sure there has to be some legislation against. So Kim has actively dismissed and argued against and shut down genuine efforts to bring about coordinated change and restore power and freedom and justice and choice to we the people, despite claiming she's doing the exact opposite. As I've already said, she's told us we aren't ready. Here's another clip. This was someone else who was involved more at that sort of global level. She was involved in care. This is not connected to financial services. This is connected to food solutions. But the same principle applies, whereby a whole lot of work being done, and it's all connected, because our reliance on systems is not just about us getting the funds from the systems, it's what we then spend those funds on, of course. So having resources whereby we can start communities of interest where people can access, organic, wholesome, either locally sourced or ethically sourced sort of products and whatnot, all of that kind of stuff, as we know, is important. Kim were promising that when this new UNN, the current version of it was set up, there were going to be a marketplace. I could be wrong, but I might be to blame for that never coming to fruition, because at the time that I sent that content over in February of 2024, the way Kim was speaking was that the marketplace were going to be ready imminently. Now, of course, she's done that about many things that have never transpired. But her narrative changed as soon as I'd sent that content over. Kim announced some hiccups, some delays, some issues that they'd found with the programming and how best to make it user friendly. And could have been a coincidence, but I wonder whether there may have been some revision, some reflection on her part or the part of the team that she's working with as to how wise it would be to have other people posting their content, their ideas, their, because it would being described, it would being promoted as if it were going to be something that anybody and everybody, regardless of what your background, profession, whatever it is that you wanted to share with people, there'd be some aspect of the marketplace where you could do that, and everyone could get to know everybody's stuff, whatever it is you want to share, right? So that got delayed as soon as I'd sent that other info over. Now, could have had nothing to do with that. Those delays might have happened anyway, as far as I'm aware. It's never got set up. But here's another example of someone else who put a lot of hours, a lot of energy, cared a lot about getting a certain initiative going, and nothing ever came of it because of a lack of cooperation and a lack of communication and an unwillingness on the part of those who are saying they really want to see, the people pull together and stuff get off the ground. Kim, more specifically, she was the reason, or her direction, her leadership was the reason it didn't happen. So I'll let you hear it from her.
Hi there, this is part 2 of my story. My name is Jennifer, and folks that know me well can call me Jen. In part 1, I talked about how I kind of came into CARE and, well, what is now CARE and Kim Goguen initiatives, and some of what my involvement was. I've described things connected to Life Force and UNN. And then I moved into what became CARE and CARE Food Security and other initiatives. So here I'm going to pick that up. I had become, through trying to keep CARE Food Security from just toppling, when Max Lowen was removed as the sort of leader of that area, and other people that were loyal to Max that were heading those sort of subgroups were also had also left. I stepped into facilitating these meetings and leading that project. So in CARE Food Security, one of the main objectives was to create a website that was like a database. And the idea was we would match people that were growing food in various areas to people that were wanting to buy that kind of food in similar areas. And it was going to be pretty simple because you could just match them up by postal codes within a certain radius. And there was also then trucking and transport, how to get that there if people couldn't organize it themselves. So it wouldn't have been quite difficult. What was really difficult was gathering all those resources and all that information. And we had wonderful people from all over the world contributing website links and farmers market links and farming links, and it was just going to be spectacular. However, as the facilitator of that, I couldn't get anywhere coordinating the website direction from CARE. And I was told repeatedly that, oh yes, there's definitely a website. It's being worked on for months and months and months. And even though we kept going, at a certain point, we just had to have the actual implementation of the website, and it never came through. While all that was going on, I'm experiencing wonderful meetings with people who were contributing from their heart as volunteers. But I was seeing that from the leadership, there was just sort of like crickets for the most part. And that was surprising to me, because if you are a master strategist, then you would give more direction than, oh, yes, well, for now, you can start a water restoration program, but only for potable water. We'll deal with environmental water separately in some other separate thing, which I never heard anything about. Still haven't heard anything about to this day through the work of others, because I left the organization, and I'll tell you a little bit about why.
Okay, so there's three parts to Jennifer's story, and worth listening to. Again, Team Bubba has shared that, but it's also available on. There's a Telegram group called The Real History with Kim Goguen, something like that, or Real History and Truth, maybe. I'll have to. I'll look it up and I'll share it. In another session that I did. I should have included that, really. But this information is, it's out there. People can access it. There's many other people that have commented about things that they've contributed or help that they've offered or work that they've done. And it's been for nothing, because these things just get shut down as soon as anything really starts to gain any real momentum, and people want to see results from it, then there's a reshuffle, people get kicked out, Kim changes alliances and allegiances, and it's all forgotten, squashed, then it's swept under the rug. People are then expected to act like all of that were just a fever dream, nothing to see here. Moving on. Which is incredibly unfair and disrespectful to the people that have put time and energy. Me myself with the assemblies, I were covering costs for things, paying for a PO box, paying for an extra Zoom account so that we could all utilize that. Trying to think, a Dropbox account so that we had somewhere that we could all store as records and stuff. And it's not the end of the world, but at the same time, it's incredibly disrespectful to other people that it doesn't get addressed. There's no care, in terms of from the tippy top of the leadership. There's no concern for how it could have affected other people. I've heard other people talk about how they took time away from the families and stuff because it felt so important to them to be part of genuine change. And as and when situations arise where people then start to question, like, we just need an official website, for instance, when is that going to happen? They're sort of pushed out of the organization, and or they never get the answers, and they've no choice but to just forget everything they've done and walk away themselves, which is all the more frustrating when then I hear Kim telling people, or I see Kim, if it's a transcript I'm looking at, see Kim telling people, we just need to pull together, we just need to work together. Well, you've been at this publicly, putting this information out since 2016, and you've had thousands of people ready, willing, waiting, wanting to be involved and to do things. And what have you done with that? All the way back in 2016, according to Kim, you're already working with teams of people, sifting through all of the contradictory aspects of Kim's narratives is incredibly frustrating. And I think it's one of those things that you're never really going to get a state of full clarity as to what is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I don't think there's ever going to be that resolution to, what has been, at this point, 9 years of deception. And who knows how much longer it's going to go on for the people that are still following. Okay, so that is all that I wanted to cover for this particular session. As you can see, as far as I'm concerned, Kim has actively blocked people accessing funding and or financial support, either for themselves in their own lives or being able to redirect currency that is being used, according to her, to harm themselves. What could have been, you know, understood in a different way and approached in a different way and utilized in a different way could have already led to some change happening. But that were ignored, that were dismissed, false promises were made, and everybody's supposed to just forget about that and move on. So thank you for listening. I do have a number of other sessions to record and catch back up with. You know, there's other 2 parts to the magic overview that I did. I still need to do the tools and techniques and approaches one, and then why it's important for us as light workers. I also have some other stuff I want to record around things dots have connected about Kim's involvement with certain people and organizations, because they're actually relevant to how I've been targeted and I've been affected, because, you know, I've been piecing what has been a few years of just, you know, what seems like random events. I'm seeing connection in some of them now, and I'm still, you know, kind of weighing up as to, I don't want to enter a state of paranoia. You know, I don't want to jump the gun and get very you know, conspiratorial, and, you know, this has all been in one big gang stalking campaign. But there's certain things that have come to light that, you know, logically, rationally, I think have a right to now question, and some of that I would like to share and lay out for people, and it ties in with the why we as light workers need to be careful who we're investing in, what we're investing in, to what degree we are investing, you know, how much we are opening ourselves up to targeting, because there's been some harsh lessons learned on my part. As far as my actual content, the stuff that I, you know, from my higher self, higher guidance perspective, is the main focus of my work. The reason I'm not rushing to get that stuff out at the minute, there's part of me that feels very like I that's what I want to do, that's what I should be doing. I'm also feeling hesitation at this moment in time. Anything I put out, I'm seeing it being used in Kim's content. And it's funny because I told you in one of the sessions that I did, when I'm getting heavily attacked, like energetically, what also seems to happen in the physical material reality is I start getting loads of just random, you know, like spam messages and just random people on Facebook and Telegram and stuff just wanting to, like, hey, how are you, kind of thing. But lately, what's been really funny to me is I'm getting people asking me, like random people just popping up who I'm not replying to for the most part. But all right, I've started this now, so I need to tell you. All right, so on Twitter, I've just set up a new Twitter account. I'm only following 18 people on there, and there's only 8 people following me. I've barely posted anything. I've just reposted some things. One of the few people that I'm following is Dr. Jack Cruz. And if you've seen the stuff I've recently recorded, you'll know in the Planes of Existence Densities video, I talk about just how valuable his work is, and I allude to I am going to talk more about some of his content in some of my content in terms of the significance of it, in terms of how reality functions. So I got a message as if from Dr. Jack Kruse, but not from his official account, from another Dr. Jack Kruse account. And being me, at some point, I'm going to get over the gullibility and naivety that seems to be ingrained into me. But seeing this direct message, it being Dr. Jack Kruse, I was just like, oh God, that's great, you know, how cool. So it was a thank you for following him on his official account and for reposting some of his stuff. And I'm just like, hey, I am a huge fan. So there were a bit back and forth. But while this back and forth was happening, and whoever this other person were pretending to be Dr. Jack Kruse, another Dr. Jack Kruse messaged me from another account. At which point I was like, that's strange. So I went on Dr. Jack Kruse, who had been messaging me in the first place. Luckily, you know, I'd not said anything that I ought to be worried about, or, you know, but they had, whoever they are, had been asking me certain questions, and what I'd replied with, they're asking me about what my understanding of the significance of mitochondria and in conjunction with light transmission was, and luckily my reply had been, it'd be easier for me to just record a session for you. I'll probably do one more specifically tailored to you, because it's not something I think many people would grasp in the same way that you would. I don't intend in my content that I'm recording to go into as much detail. I intend to just, you know, later I probably will, but initially I just want to introduce the concept. So that I'd basically said, you know, it'd be better for me to just send you a explanation a lot quicker to verbalize it than to type it out. So then I'd had another message from a different Dr. Kruse, which was why I was then like, oh, hang on. So when I went on to, I scrolled, I had to go all the way back to about 2015, and then I finally found the account had been used. It must have been under some of the name posing as someone else at the time, because either that or back in 2015, Dr. Jack Kruse were thanking someone for complimenting his dress, which and like the verbiage of it, it was so funny when I took a screenshot and sent it back to the person and then blocked him, because I was just like, that's really funny actually, because Dr. Jack Kruse, his reply had been like, thanks babe. You know, it's like, I was like, oh, but it was funny that they were fishing for information. And then I've had a few other like Telegram messages, people saying, hey, I've seen you on this group, and it was to do with like the legal lawful stuff. How are you finding it? What are your thoughts on this? Like asking me very specific questions, which normally when the spam messages kick in, it's like, do you want to earn £300 a day on TikTok? Or, you know, it's that kind of stuff. Whereas, yeah, it's made me laugh that it's like, seems like there's specific information someone's wanting for some reason, and I don't feel inclined to give it until I feel sure that there's some way to protect the information and it not get passed off as someone else's, which I'm gonna have to, you know, figure out how best to do that, because I can speak out about it, but it doesn't seem to be preventing certain parties from still monitoring what I'm recording and what I'm saying and what I'm doing, which you know, anybody with any suggestions that might come and watch this, please put in the comments. Let me know. My email's in the description. Send an email. I would appreciate it. But yeah, I intend for the time being to just continue to explain and describe more about the magic witchcraft stuff, because it can hopefully help some people. And I'll just keep exposing the people that have decided for some ridiculous reason to make my life a misery. We can just go toe to toe with that then. Okay, well, how do you like it? Let's see. Right, so all of that said, please do check out the sovereignty resources recommended. They really do provide a wealth of useful information and solutions that bring various benefits, both financially and in terms of confidence and self-awareness. Of course, I'm only encouraging it if it's something you want to do, but hopefully I've explained why, you know, there could be benefits to that within this session. Much love, everyone. Good night.